everybody. Welcome back to another exciting week. We got a really special guest this week. I'm really excited to have Mitt Winter on. He's one of the prominent voices out there in the NIL industry right now and the whole sports legal community. Very bright mind. I've enjoyed getting to know and getting to meet Mitt over the last year, and really excited to sit down and have this conversation with him. And so Mitt, from pronounce your firm name. I don't want to mispronounce it here.
That's Kenny Hertz Perry.
There we go. That's see, I get a little tongue tied. I got to be honest. Sometimes I'm better on text message. Sometimes, just because of being tongue tied. So, but tell us a little bit. I love your background and where you're coming from. With NIL, oftentimes when I go to campuses and I do educational speeches, I like to, preface, where the information is coming from in terms of experience. And I love your background and where you're coming from. So tell us a little bit about Mitt Winter and where this knowledge is coming from.
Sure. So I have a pretty, long background in college sports and also the legal side of it. I'm a former college basketball player myself. I played basketball at William & Mary, which is a Division I school in Williamsburg, Virginia. After that, went to law school at the University of San Francisco and lived out there for about 10 years, practiced law out there for about 7 years. My first job out of law school, I worked at a law firm in San Francisco named Bingham McCutcheon, which was a big law firm, about 1,000 attorneys. No longer exists. Merged with Morgan Lewis sometime, I think, around 2012, after I had already left and moved to Kansas City, where I am now. But when I was at Bingham McCutcheon as a young attorney, like first or second year associate, one of the first cases I got to work on was a case representing the NCAA. It was an antitrust case alleging that the NCAA's rule that limits FBS football teams to 85 scholarships violated antitrust law. So that's kind of how I got my start in the college sports law world. That case didn't go anywhere. Nothing changed. It eventually settled after a class wasn't certified. But shortly after that case, I got to work on another case for the NCAA named White versus NCAA. And that case dealt with college athlete compensation. At the time when that case was filed, an athletic scholarship for Division I could just consist of tuition and fees, room and board, and books. And so this case was another antitrust case saying that limit on the value of an athletic grant and aid also violated antitrust law. And it was seeking a remedy that would allow athletic scholarships to go up cost of attendance. And as I know, Keith, and probably other people on here know, now a scholarship can go up to the cost of attendance. It wasn't a result of that case. That case also settled before it went to trial. The rule on the value of an athletic scholarship didn't change, but a few things got changed related to student assistance fund. And there was also a thing called the Student Athlete Opportunity Fund. Some of those funds got merged together and could be used for different things. So started out kind of working on those cases, and then in 2011 moved to Kansas City, where I am now. Worked for a different firm called Polsinelli, and when I was there, we represented the Big 12 and Conference USA and all their legal work. So that varied from conference realignment stuff, TV, broadcast contracts, lots of litigation matters, including O'Bannon and Alston. So I worked on both of those cases from the conference side, which was basically the NCAA side as well. Then in 2019, moved to my current firm, Kenny Hertz Perry, which is much smaller than the two previous firms I had worked at. We have 11 attorneys now. I think Polsinelli was also another big firm, sort of like Bingham. And when I moved here, just had, didn't have any of those established client relationships with like the Big 12, Conference USA, and the NCAA had at these other firms. So I had some more freedom to kind of explore different things. And it was around the time when NIL was becoming a thing, when some of the state laws, especially California, Florida, were being passed, and then the NCAA decided it was going to, kind of cave to those and change its rules. And then kind of here we are. I've done a lot of different stuff in the NIL space since July 1, 2021, when the rules actually changed. I represent a number of collectives, NIL collectives, some universities, a bunch of different NIL startups, some sports agencies, some athletes. So I've kind of done, going back a ways, a lot of stuff in college sports, and then more recently, a lot of different stuff in the NIL space.
Yeah. And, my background is, I wasn't a basketball student athlete like yourself. I often pretend in my mind I had a little bit of skill on the basketball court, but, I grew up in Chicago, so I was always trying to emulate Michael Jordan or Scottie Pippen, but I was neither. But,
not many of us are.
Yeah, well, you're closer to it than I was, but I went to law school, and then I got into the business because I decided I didn't want to practice, but I did want to go work with college student athletes and help develop and help mentor and educate. So I went on the different end of things and went to through the compliance angle, and I was actually very knee deep in financial aid. And one of the little hidden known things about me is I love working with the financial aid bylaws, and, was able to really help, do a lot of, internally within the NCAA, with some of the, interpretations, helping a lot of other schools. In fact, I still work with a couple of schools that need a little help with financial aid matters, and not an easy area to navigate. And I definitely remember the times, going through the cost of attendance things, on campus. And I was definitely part of the Big 12 when you were there. But I've enjoyed. You've really become a prominent voice, a trusted voice in the NIL landscape right now, and I think what you bring to the table is you're very objective with how you're seeing things. You've got a very good analysis and breakdown. You provide a very good summary on things, which is really why I wanted to get you on here, because we're seeing a lot of student athletes. I know we're getting a lot of universities that'll watch these videos, and I know as they're being recorded and being rewatched, I think there's a lot of good nuggets out there that people need to understand, but beyond just reading reading a headline or reading a tweet that refers to an article, but folks not actually reading the article, but just reading the tweet. So I know there's a lot of good hidden nuggets, about the NIL landscape that we can really talk about here from a legal context. And you mentioned one term that I love to talk about when I'm on campus, and even with other professionals. I like to talk about antitrust, and I often find myself needing to explain the ABCs of antitrust law, because that's not something that folks commonly know. What that means. Even though there's a movie I think named that, I never actually watched it, but I'm not that cool. I don't stay up to date with all my movie watching, but I just always try to talk about antitrust law as, it's more of a federal law, set of laws, really, and case precedent that really are set to establish the general public from, being manipulated from a monopoly type of market. And that's about as easy as I can frame it. You got a better way to frame that, for folks not familiar with antitrust law?
Yeah, I mean, a good way to describe it as relevant to college athletics is that businesses or entities cannot get together and collude to set prices on things. And that could be prices they're going to charge people for a product, or prices that they're going to buy products at.
Right.
Which is sort of what's relevant for college athletics. Because when you
Right.
talk about antitrust as applied to college athletics, the big one is, and as was addressed in Alston, is what are the amount of benefits that can be provided by a school to the athletes, and that that's changed over time. Like as I mentioned, when I was working on the White case, it was just tuition and fees, room and board, books. After O'Bannon, the remedy in that case, which found that the NCAA violated antitrust law by setting the value that athletes could receive NIL.
We lost Mitt here for a second. Hopefully we reestablish connection.
Sorry.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I got you.
I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me. Okay. Well, hopefully that pops on back here in a sec. I am not the technical genius behind a lot of things computer wise and software, but I'm quite reliant on others to help with the graphics that we do at Influxer, but really enjoy. Can you hear me now? No, not yet. Oh no.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I cannot hear you.
Oh no.
I'm not sure what happened.
Oh boy. Hopefully we can get that fixed here.
Let me try and leave and come back in.
Sounds great.
Sorry.
No problem. So as I was talking about, one of the things I've greatly appreciated about, joining Influxer is being able to bring education, bring a lot of other types of expertise into this, and, have a lot of other, folks, graphically help with the education and goals there. But can you hear me now, Mitt?
Yep, I can hear you now. I'm not sure what happened there. Sorry,
yeah.
I was having tech problems with my computer today, so I'm on my cell phone. So
no problem. No problem.
Right. So I think I was talking about how antitrust kind of has applied to college athletics. It was talking about how the limit of an athletic scholarship has changed over time, and after O'Bannon, it went up to the cost of attendance, and then after Alston, which was another antitrust case that found that the limits on educationally related benefits that schools could provide to athletes violated antitrust law. And the remedy the court put in place there said schools have to be allowed to give their athletes unlimited educationally related benefits, and that they could also give them up to $5,980 per year as academic awards and graduation awards and incentives.
Right.
So gradually, antitrust law has kind of chipped away at that limit of compensation and benefits that schools can provide to their athletes.
Yeah, and I remember when I going through law school, reading, analyzing, hearing my professors talk about, the Oklahoma case from way back in the day. And I know I'm not, was it Georgia, Oklahoma, essentially around the TV rights. And then, gradually after that, the next one was the restricted earnings case for coaches, and which is always funny when I do, read comments on social media, folks, we need to restrict coaches' compensation. I'm like, we've kind of been there doing that actually.
Already tried that.
Yeah. And, so that's kind of a dead end, but it doesn't stop folks from commenting. And I always appreciate reading other people's opinions, but it's kind of one of those dead end issues that's already, been litigated to no end. So,
yeah.
But yeah.
And then one thing I did mention is there is another big antitrust case pending right now that you're probably familiar with, and some other people are too, the House case, which is before the same judge that heard the O'Bannon case and the Alston case. So she's ruled against the NCAA twice in antitrust cases. And in my opinion, I don't see why she's not going to rule against the NCAA again, at least at the trial court level, and then go up to the Ninth Circuit and possibly the Supreme Court again. But that case would basically eliminate more compensation limits that are still in place on what schools can provide to athletes, including schools being able to directly pay athletes, at least for their NIL rights.
And I know it seems like the general public seems pretty split on that issue, and it is interesting, sometimes reading through social media and talking with folks, they're, even NIL just in general, sometimes there is a split. I don't want to say that's 50-50. I don't think that's 50-50 at all, but I mean, there's, some folks that still don't, believe NIL. I know I was working with one particular business recently, and they, student athlete had talked about, wanting to do something with the particular business, and the business just pretty much straight up just told them, we don't believe in NIL. Good luck. And okay,
Yep.
I hear you. And every business is entitled to take whatever approach they'd like to, of course. But I think as we're approaching a critical time, and we scheduled this talk months ago, and we were kind of loose with how we were going to frame this, because we honestly didn't know 2 months ago where we'd be, because every day it seems like we got different headlines to really consider, put some thought into, and talk about. I think you and I are both pretty similar in the opinion that federal legislation is pretty unlikely at this point. But one thing I think about quite a bit is this whole conversation, state law versus the voluntary member association. We've got a number of states now that have passed state laws stating that organizations such as the NCAA cannot enforce different penalties or even investigate different things. And I've thought about that from a couple different angles. Love to get your take on it, but I've wondered internally, are these state laws being passed to protect universities? So in some people's minds, probably let the universities do what they want to help the student athletes. That's one thought I had. Then the other thought I had was, is the state law really there to put some constraints or prevent universities from enforcing NCAA rules? I think, the general perception of the public is probably that, these state laws are there to help the NCAA or help the universities, kind of operate without impunity from the NCAA. But then part of me is thinking, part of these state laws is probably there so the universities, as you mentioned, collude in terms of a voluntary member organization, enforce a different set of guidelines. Do you think, in some respect, that some of the state laws are being passed to prevent that from occurring, like any other type of collusion down the road?
I don't think any of the state laws that have been passed so far that prohibit the NCAA from doing certain things are addressed really at getting rid of perceived NCAA collusion with respect to NIL. I think they're really being passed because, and you kind of touched on it, a lot of schools want to do more for their athletes in the NIL space, and some of they're not bylaws, the NCAA policy, and then some of the guidelines and clarifications, which who knows if those are enforceable on their own or not, are pretty restrictive on things that schools can do with their athletes and benefits they can provide to their athletes in the NIL space. And so I think a lot of them are addressed at that. And then I think you also have a situation where so much of college athletics is competition for recruits. And if you have a state law that's going to allow you to do certain things that schools in other states are not allowed to do, where it might make it easier for your athletes to receive NIL compensation, I think you're going to perceive that there's going to be a recruiting benefit potentially there. So I think some of the state laws are also aimed at that. I don't think anyone's actually thought, we're going to pass this state law to end the NCAA's collusion. But I do think some of the states have, probably gotten, and schools have gotten a little frustrated with it's how the rulemaking has gone, and they know that if they want to change rules through the regular NCAA legislative process, it's going to take forever and probably not ever happen.
It is, just being on the inside, reflecting back on my career, at universities, it is difficult to pass certain types of rules because you do have to get a lot of people to agree on certain things, certain verbiage, and I oftentimes got very frustrated when I was like, boy, this is so simple. And it was frustrating, at certain moments in that career, but so I certainly get the frustration, from a lot of folks. I'm actually part of it, and I don't think there's a lot of folks that I think probably even internally within the NCAA, if they could, they would change certain things right away. But yes, it is a cumbersome process where you do have to get a lot of folks to agree, and oftentimes the voting comes down to big schools versus small schools, and you do see some of those issues really kind of result in where we're at today. There's a few things I've reflected on in my career. I'd love to get your take, just as a former basketball student athlete. I don't want to date how old you are or anything like that. I'm sure.
Go ahead. Graduated college in 2001.
Okay.
So
all right.
Extrapolate from that.
All right. So you're a student athlete, late 90s. What was what was the experience then compared to like the experience you think student athletes are having nowadays, where you feel like that would have been something you would have been greatly beneficial, or like something that would have impacted you a lot more than, I don't know how to put this into words, but I mean, in today's day and age, like what would you have liked the most?
Well, obviously, kind of as I touched on earlier, especially the Division I level as a college athlete, you can receive more compensation. So I know at William and Mary, where I went, the basketball players, they have cost of attendance scholarships now, so they're getting more cash in their pocket to spend on. When you have a cost of attendance stipend, you can technically spend it on whatever you want.
Live a normal life.
Yeah. Not that I was, necessarily hurting for money in college, but it would have been nice. And then you can also get the Alston Awards, and then on top of that, NIL now as well. So there's just a lot more opportunities to see more compensation from spending the time that you spend as a college athlete. And that's another big difference from when I was playing to now. I think now the athletes, especially in basketball and football, they have to spend a lot more time, especially in the off season, on their sport than I did. So when I was playing, I went home pretty much for the entire summer, except for between my junior and senior year, I took one class, just so I wouldn't have to take as many classes during the school year that year, and worked a little job as well. But we didn't have any organized workouts really to speak of at all in the summer. The coaches just kind of let you go home and play in a summer league, a local pro-am, lift weights on your own, whatever it was. Now, especially at the Division I level, you're on campus most of summer. Just the time you're spending now is much greater than when I played, and also the amount of money that's being generated from college sports, especially at the P5 FBS football level. Division I basketball, men's and women's, is also much greater than I was playing around 20 years ago.
I know one of the things I'm grateful to not have to deal with now, but I think you hit on a point. Things are a little bit different now compared to the past, in terms of time constraints. And yeah, summer is definitely one of those things where, there's a lot of required things in football and basketball right now where student athletes need to be there over the summer. But yeah, it used to be optional, slowly glided into you can be here and we can pay for you during the summer, to now where there are required workouts during the summer. So things have changed, drastically in terms of time constraints. But one of the things I'm actually very thankful for that I'm not dealing with on a daily basis, and if there's compliance people that are watching, I'm really sorry to rub this in, but I don't need to deal with all the time constraint rules that are out there now, especially for the Power Fives. That is complex. It's heavily regulated as to the student athlete's time, which is honestly a good thing, to protect the student athlete's time, but very complex. Not a lot of fun to deal with, and I'm glad to not have to deal with that anymore. But I think there's been a lot of good initiatives here, and I don't think, I think sometimes, as I talk to folks, there's folks that see, there's good guys and bad guys or whatever in this industry. But I always like to see the positive in everybody and everything. And I think everybody at the end of the day really wants to make sure student athletes are receiving education and taken care of. But I think how we get there is just sometimes where there's a lot of differences, and where, and that, which is unfortunately slowing things down, where I feel like most folks are feeling like we're not getting anywhere, but that's neither here nor there for today, because we're not going to pass it on our little talk today. But eventually, hopefully there is some collaboration and everybody can kind of get on the same page, and we can get somewhere. But I think NIL, in general, has been a great step to empower folks. And I know from my standpoint, I really enjoy getting on campus and talking to folks. I think, and I'd love to hear your experience on this, because, my experience is, I think there are some members of the general public that think this is a quick cash grab in some respects, for some student athletes. And that's not been my experience. And that's not how I see this. I see this as a great development tool for student athletes that want to expand on their experience and kind of develop themselves for, beyond college. And the student athletes that I've worked with over the, since NIL has really come into play, has really shown me that, these are student athletes that really truly want to, obviously, hit while the iron's hot. I don't blame anybody for that. But they also want to develop themselves and really start to develop their brand, their name, for 5 years, 10 years down the line. And I don't see an issue with that. But from your experience, and you're working with collectives more so than I am, I've got a few that I'm working with, but what's your experience been in terms of, cash grab versus, hey, no, that's not what we're about. We're about trying to develop and help these student athletes get experience and learn some other things.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to talk about NIL kind of in two different ways. There's, I guess, what people call true NIL, where it's athletes being matched up with, serving as endorsers for businesses, where they're kind of going out on their own and trying to find these businesses that want to work with them. Then you have collective deals, which a lot of it is matching them up with businesses, but it's a little bit different in terms of the things that the athletes are doing in terms of being paid for collectives. The collectives are setting up lots of opportunities for the athletes to go out and do different things that allows them to monetize their NIL. And so the athletes aren't having to do as much when they have the collective doing that for them. And then in other instances, you'll have athletes who may not be working with a collective at all, and they're having to put in a lot more time on the things you mentioned, the branding, kind of developing their own business plan for going out and finding deals and businesses they want to work with, setting up a business, kind of reviewing agreements or contracts their own or with the help of someone. So there's really two different worlds of NIL. If you're mostly just doing deals with a collective, the collective is generally coming to you and saying, hey, we would like to do a deal with you, and here are the things that we're going to have you do and that you'll be able to do to monetize your NIL. As opposed to, if you're not working with a collective, you're probably out hustling a little bit more and putting more time into developing some of those skills in that branding.
Yeah, and I from my eyes, I see the student athletes getting more engaged, and really, I feel like there's been more freedom to network with some of the past alums and some of the donors and some of the local businesses than maybe 10 years ago, where, I think there's more apprehension about what is that relationship between the student athlete and the alum, to whereas now, hey, that's okay. And actually, that's something universities will support and say, please spend some time with our student athletes, dive in, pour into them your knowledge, your expertise, and how you developed yourself or your business, and, pour into them. And I've definitely noticed that in talking, with some of the folks that I work with on a regular basis. And, that's one of the things that I don't think always gets, reflected all the time in social media, where you do a good job of it. And I've seen others do a really good job of really highlighting some of those good opportunities of developing student athletes. But we're
on that topic, I do agree that the change in the NIL rules has kind of eliminated that firewall that existed for such a long time between athletes and alumni and boosters or alumni that own businesses or whatever it may be. Before NIL was allowed, it was always like, stay away from the boosters and the alumni because, you're probably going to violate some rule. But now you get to go out and do a lot more of this networking and meet alumni who might own businesses. It might turn into, a great relationship or job at some point in the future. And you're just able to kind of tap into those alumni networks a lot more than you were before the rules changed.
I think if I was to caption and put a picture on what that fear was, you ever seen that movie Johnny Be Good, the old movie with Robert Downey Jr. and some folks might not, one of those perfect 80s movies, great montages and music and wild hair and all that. But I think that movie really captured a lot of what that fear was. Also went into some other pretty interesting things, but as a fisherman, love the walleye lures that were in that movie. But I think if anybody wants a little entertainment value and that's kind of related to NIL, that's a great watch. But where would you like to see NIL go from here? I mean, what do you think is the next logical step?
That's a good question. I think what we'll see is we'll see more. Well, I think we'll see more big brands get into NIL. I think a lot of big brands stayed out initially because they were, unsure of what the rules were and how everything would work, and were worried that they would violate a rule or they would make an athlete violate a rule and make the athlete ineligible. But I think people have gotten a lot more comfortable with how things work. I think we'll also see probably more local businesses get involved. I think there's a push to sort of educate local businesses on what NIL is, and the fact that they can now use college athletes as promoters of their business or their product, especially in college towns the football, basketball players, what other sport, depending on what sport's big at that school, those athletes are often going to be the biggest celebrities in town and the best marketers for a local business. And so I think there's going to be more of a push to educate those businesses and tap into the marketing potential that college athletes have for those businesses. And then, from the collective side, I think we'll see a lot more collectives, get more comfortable with their business strategy and how they're going to operate and the different things that they can provide to fan bases now that they are able to interact with the athletes and help the fans interact with the athletes. I think there will be a lot of creativity there in different things, whether that's content creation or events that collectives will be able to do that will create more NIL monetization opportunities for college athletes.
Yeah, I think at first I kept hearing the phrase return on investment. What's the ROI for some of the folks that are involved in collectives, and there was general concern. Are folks involved with collectives going to make a one-time donation? Is it going to be a repeat donation? How do you strategize for those things? And it seems like some have struggled with that, some have done well with that. I feel like reading the headlines and reading some of your stuff, the folks that have strategized well, in terms of ROI, how to help the student athletes, but also further the mission of the collective. They've done better. I feel like some of the collectives that really just kind of jumped out there without a plan haven't really survived too well. But some of the ones that you're involved with, what do you feel like the number one strategy is for a collective to survive, and not just inception of year one, but moving on to year 2, year 3, year 4?
Yeah, I think they all know they need to figure out a long-term revenue generation strategy that doesn't 100% rely on donor money. And I think a lot of them have figured out that they can use the donor money for a while, kind of as basically startup seed capital for the collective. And then they know that they're going to have to figure out what that long-term revenue generation strategy is, because donor dollars could dry up at any time. A donor could just decide, I'm not going to donate this year. So that it'd be hard to just 100% rely on donations. And then, some of the ones that were operating as nonprofits and 501c3, that the IRS memo that came out has, scared some of the donors. And so that's another issue with trying to rely on donor money if you're a nonprofit, or even if you're not a nonprofit.
Right. And I know, Jeff, my niche, my nerdy area is international student athletes, and that's definitely something I pay attention to. And the voluntary or the volunteer community efforts and some of the interplay with how that affects some of the international stuff is something that, I'm working with a lot of folks, I've really tried to help shed a little bit of light on, because, some of the collective efforts, with community types of services and stuff that actually can impact some of the stuff with international law. Far too nerdy to get into on this call, but it's definitely one of those things that's out there. There's a lot of complex areas. There are some areas that are just not that complex, to NIL. One of the things, I've enjoyed, in the space that I'm in, Influxer, we're doing a lot of different things. We're doing the consulting, we're doing a lot of education, which is big on my heart. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I love getting out and talking. We're doing a lot of merchandising deals with student athletes, which has been very successful for us. And I don't know if you knew this, but the interesting thing about Influxer is a lot of the folks that created and staff Influxer are actually former student athletes of mine.
Huh.
that asked me to come on and join with them. And so one of the interesting things for me, I'm sure they're watching this and laughing right now, but you know, having their old compliance officer as their colleague now is interesting. And I still remember some of these folks as being 18-year-old skinny punks coming into university, and I'm sure I'll catch a little flack for that. But I've even seen this ability for student athletes as they enter into a professional working career, where this has been a good opportunity for them to figure out a pathway to help other student athletes that follow behind their footsteps and just kind of navigate their way. So I found this to be a great opportunity, multiple types of ways. But
yeah, I mean, a lot of the people working in the NIL space are former college athletes, just because they know what the college athlete experience is like, and they know kind of the pain points of where athletes are going to need help, and going out and finding deals or with branding or just whatever it is. And so I think it makes a lot of sense.
Would you recommend going to law school for all these folks?
I don't know. That's a hard question to answer.
It is.
I enjoyed law school, and I think it's worked out well for me. But to work in the NIL space, there are lots of ways to do it without going to law school. You don't necessarily have to go to law school to do it. I think it just kind of depends on what it is you want to do.
Right. I think the last kind of budding issue I have on my little list to talk about today is the issue of group licensing versus the individualized contracts. And, I'm definitely on the side of, I like to negotiate individually with student athletes and like to give them that ability to negotiate on their own behalf. And been on the other side of group licensing, preventing those conversations from even happening, which I think is a shame, which is, so, I'm definitely on that side. But EA Sports football game, I grew up loving that game, building my own dynasties and dynasty mode and all that kind of stuff. And if you didn't know it, I love video games too. But did you ever play EA, like any of the football games?
Oh yeah, yep. And funny enough, one of my boys, I have a 14-year-old boy and a 12-year-old boy. A few weeks ago, I was telling the 12-year-old boy who likes to play, the sports video games, like, I was in a video game once, one of the college basketball games. So they have these simulators. You can go online now and find all the old games. I can't remember, it was, Coach K basketball in 99 or 2000 or whatever. He found it on there, and he found William and Mary, and he was playing as me, and he's like, "You suck. You're only like a 70 on your 3-point shoot," and stuff. But it was kind of funny to watch him play as me on that game. So that was kind of cool.
You just got to find somebody that can manipulate those numbers and take you from a 77 to a 99 or something, along that line. But
yep. On the group licensing issue, kind of with EA Sports, as you know, there's some lawsuits going on about who has the right to represent college athletes in the group licensing for the football game, at least, and just in general. So I think it does really point out that it would be very helpful if there's one organization that is able to kind of be that organization that is representing at least football, basketball, maybe some other sports in group licensing, so you don't have a situation like you have right now with the EA Sports situation, because you have Brandar saying, well, we have the rights to go out and find group licensing deals for athletes in these sports and at these schools, and you have one team partners, doing it with EA Sports, and no one really knows who has the right to go out and represent these athletes for group licensing deals. So if there was one entity that clearly had the right to do that, I think you'd see a lot more, potentially, relatively lucrative group licensing deals than what we have now.
Yeah, the thing I worry about is, gosh, if this turns out no student athletes get any compensation out of this, then
Yeah.
that scares me. Um, because otherwise, the next winter with their 12-year-old boy trying to play them on a video game, the dad's going to be bitter about not receiving compensation for
I
that.
didn't receive any compensation either, so that was when they didn't ask for your permission. They just did it.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely remember those days. But Mitt, I really thank you for the time and appreciate everything you do on social media, just in terms of highlighting different things happening. I know there's a lot of folks out there that think very highly of the information, the service you provide to everybody. Even though you're not getting paid for a lot of your Twitter thoughts and things like that, but I'll tell you, I do greatly value it. I appreciate a lot of the information you put out there, because I think it really does, help the conversation, push it in the right direction. And I think there's a lot of good folks spreading good information out there. You're one of them, and appreciate everything you do. And thank you for the time today to let us get to know you and hear some of your thoughts on some of this stuff. So
yeah, thanks. Appreciate the kind words. And I just like keeping up with everything going on in the NIL spaces. There's a ton going on. I like to read and keep up with what's going on. And so when I see something, just kind of throw out a few thoughts in my head about something I read, and I'm glad people enjoy it and get some value out of it.
Well, appreciate everything. Thanks a lot, Mitt. And if anybody wants to reach them, you want to give them your website for the law firm?
Yeah, sure. Just KennyHurtsPerry.com, and my email address is mitt, MIT, at KennyHurtsPerry.com. It's KennyHertzPerry.com. It's a mouthful.
Good thing you spelled that one out.
I always have to spell that one.
I appreciate it. Well, thanks a lot, Mitt, and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Yep. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.